Okay, well, welcome. This is Zarinah, El-Amin, Naeem, and this is our masterclass with Mr. Lee Gutkind. And today we are going to be speaking on creative nonfiction. And we're also going to talk to Mr. Gutkind a little bit about the fellowship that he is offering with one of the organizations that he started, Think, Write, and Publish. So before we get started, let's see who we have in the room today, and let's do a little check-in just to make sure that everything is up and running and everyone can hear, everyone can see, and all of those things. So I think we have about 13 people on the line right now, Lee. And you all who are here, if you can tell us what types of books you all are working on. Are they memoirs? Have you already written something? You know, tell us what you're working on. What type of writer are you? And we'll get that in. So let's see who has already answered. We have Tahira, who doesn't have a draft yet. However, she plans to write one. Okay, so let's see, what type of draft are you planning to write, Tahira? We have some other people that say greetings. So Akanke, greetings. Welcome. Jenaba, welcome. Khadija, welcome. Rabia, welcome. Cheryl, welcome. That's my mother. Cheryl, welcome. Uma Fraz, welcome. Okay, I see we have some wonderful. So let us know what you all are working on. And while you all are chiming in, I'll tell you a little bit about what our goals are today. Many people have come to us within NIA Press when we just are really kicking off and really pushing our goal to help Muslim and spiritual authors to tell their stories to the world. And many people come to us and they are a little bit confused as to how to distill their story into a format that actually will be read, you know, something that will be engaging for other people. And that is our goal for today, to be able to tap a little bit into this genre of creative nonfiction, learn some tips and techniques, some tools that we can apply to our works so that we can share our messages in the best way forward. Mr. Gutkind, I'll give a formal introduction of you in just a moment, but I'll let you all know who are on the line right now as we wait for maybe a minute to get started formally, that he is a master. That's why I called this a master class. He is a master in this creative nonfiction genre and is has a wealth of information and wisdom. So we are here to glean from him. So what that means is that if you have questions, I do not want you all to be silent. If you all have some things that you have been working on and you're kind of confused about some things, this is your moment. Go ahead and type those questions in to the chat box and we will answer as many of them as we have in our short time today as well. So don't be shy, basically. Get your questions in. All right, so let's see what we have. We have, so Jennifer says she's undecided. She has so many choices. Akanke is writing a memoir and self-help motivational books. Okay. So Cheryl is saying that she's writing a fiction title with documented facts. All right. Camellia is writing self-help. Rabia is writing self-help as well. Eileen is converting her fiction into a memoir. So I guess her fiction was based on her life and now she's converting it into a memoir. Right. Let's see here. Khadija is writing a biography and self-development. Tahira says, Assalamu alaikum. I plan to write a memoir about growing up in Harlem as a biracial child during the 1960s and my eventual conversion to Islam. All right. Hind is writing fiction. We'll be working on a memoir soon. Tahira says, I've written 2 novels and several personal essays and short stories for children. Okay. Azhar is writing self-help profiles and a memoir. Okay, so that gives us a great understanding of what you all are planning to write and what you're working on right now. And I see some questions already jumping in, but we're going to come back to your questions, Eileen, and I'm going to switch over and do a formal introduction right now of Mr. Lee Gutkind. So welcome, Lee.
It's nice to be here. Let me ask you, can they hear me, or are you just telling them what I'm saying?
Let's see, everybody. Can you all hear Lee? Did you hear him just then? They should be able to hear you, but let's just check it and make sure. So can everyone hear Lee? Let's see. I don't see anyone said yes yet. All right, guys. So let me know. Can you? Okay, yes, they're saying yes. So yes, they can hear you. When you speak, you'll be speaking directly to them.
Okay, fine. But right. I can't hear them, correct?
No, so they're just on silent, but they are typing into a chat box. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a chat box, but I'll pull out any questions for you and you'll be able to answer their questions as well.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So Mr. Lee Gutkind is, as I said, a master in creative nonfiction. Vanity Fair has even called him the godfather behind nonfiction. He is an author. He is a writer, editor. He has written over 25 books, I would say. Is that correct, Lee? Is it about 25 books now?
If you count the ones I've edited, it's 30.
Oh, wow. Okay. So written or edited about 30 books. So that's a lot of experience. In addition to that, he started the first MFA, Masters of Fine Arts program in creative nonfiction. So this was the very first time that at the higher academic level, creative nonfiction was offered for a master's program. So that was really exciting. In addition to that, he has something called Think, Write, and Publish, which blends scholars and scientists with creative writers so that they can both learn from one another. And there is a fellowship that many of you all are interested in. I have shared that with you. I know one person has already applied for that fellowship, but that fellowship is blending science and religion. And we'll talk about that at the end. And if any of you all have come specifically to ask questions surrounding the fellowship, then we will be able to answer those as well. So without further ado, I would like to just welcome Lee. Welcome.
Nice to be here. It's Sunday morning here and the sun is shining. I'm in Pittsburgh.
Okay, you're in Pittsburgh. Wonderful. I'm in Michigan. So it is actually a really nice day today here as well. Okay, so let's jump right in because we know fiction, we know nonfiction, but we have this thing called creative nonfiction. And you also, as I should mention, founded a magazine called Creative Nonfiction. And in there you say true stories well told, you know. So talk to us a little bit about what is creative nonfiction and what is its importance for us.
Well, exactly what you said. If you look at the masthead of the magazine Creative Nonfiction, which is nearly 25 years old, it's a literary magazine, and the masthead says Creative Nonfiction and then True Stories Well Told. And that's pretty much what Creative Nonfiction is all about. They are true stories, totally and completely true and accurate stories that that communicate information and ideas through narrative. And when I say true and accurate, you can't, this is the title, and I hope you guys think about this as you move forward, of a book I wrote called You Can't Make This Stuff Up. And You Can't Make This Stuff Up is a complete guide to every aspect of creative nonfiction from beginning to end. It tells you what it is and how to do it, and it deconstructs essays to show you step by step how to put it together. And that's a terrific way to describe creative nonfiction, that you are writing stories with your ideas and your experiences, but you're not changing any of the details of the stories, and you're communicating information at the same time. You're teaching your readers through narrative. And that's the difference. The difference between traditional And creative nonfiction is that the traditional writer will just talk to you and tell you things, whether they be in anecdotes or stories or not, and the fiction writer will tell you lots of stories, I would hope, but those stories could be made up or exaggerated. But when you write creative nonfiction, you are trying to connect with the reader, promising the reader that you're going to entertain them cinematically with stories, but promising the reader at the same time that whatever you say is going to be accurate and true. And creative nonfiction is now the fastest growing genre in the publishing industry. And interestingly enough, it's also the fastest growing genre in the academy, in universities, and even in high schools. And I'm not just talking about creative writing programs. There are now, you just heard that I started the first MFA program in creative nonfiction. And now across the United States, there's probably, I'll take a wild guess now because it's hard to keep up, about 150 universities across the US where you can get an MFA. And there are even places, I don't recommend this, but there are even places where you can get a PhD in creative nonfiction. And so but over and above all that, people in other disciplines like economics, science, technology, engineering realize now that they have a lot to say about their lives and their work to general readers, and they're adapting this creative nonfiction model, true stories, to communicate information to people who don't necessarily understand all the facts and details surrounding their profession. So it's growing crazily and rapidly in every direction.
So it seems as though like creative nonfiction really came about to be able to tap into the way that human beings actually learn. So many of us learn through stories. We learn through talking and hearing about other people. And so you have these people who have a lot of information, but didn't really know how to creatively put that out so that other people would be able to benefit from it. So I know that you write a lot about science, and I'm kind of curious as to how you got into pulling the science and merging the science with your writing. One of your books, and I'm going to not remember the name right now. I knew I should have written this down, but one of your books was on like access to doctors and organ donating, and Many Sleepless Nights, that's the name. So that book is talking about how someone goes through the process of donating an organ and the whole process of organ donation. So how did you really get interested in merging this science world with the writing and literary world?
Well, I actually got interested in writing Many Sleepless Nights, and I've done 4 or 5 books, immersion books. We call them immersion because we immerse ourselves for very long periods of time in subjects that are of interest to us, like organ transplantation. I spent 4 years on and off in an organ transplant center, a number of organ transplant centers, and I tried to hang out and watch through the eyes of everyone: nurses, surgeons, patients, candidates for transplantation, recipients of transplantation, their families. You kind of look at the world through the eyes of the people involved, and then you tell their stories. And while you're telling their stories, you're communicating the necessary information so that people who want to understand more about the subject can understand it in a more personal way. And that's kind of what I did in organ transplantation. I spent literally 4 years living different lives of those people who were involved. I also did that in a pediatric hospital, a children's hospital, and in a psychiatric institution, where, again, I had access to go in and out of the facility. But what you do is you don't necessarily focus in on the science or the technology. You focus in on the experiences of the people behind and a part of the science and technology tell their stories. And while you're telling their stories, you're also teaching the reader what they need to know in order to understand that world. So I did that also 6 years in a off and on, not every day, not every single night, in a robotics think tank or institute, to do the same thing, to kind of figure out what a robot is, how you build robots, how computer nerds make robots think, and the challenges, and how the robot thinks, and the challenges involved. So it's a double prospect. You're communicating information, but you're communicating information through the eyes of the people who are living it. Now, that's what we call immersion creative nonfiction. But if you're doing memoir, which is personal creative nonfiction, it's untrue that you do it any differently. You're not immersing yourself with other people necessarily, but when you're writing a memoir, you're writing your own story. And here again, people are not reading. This is something that that writers need to always understand, especially new writers, that people read books and read essays for one thing, to learn about the experiences of other people, but for another thing, equally important, they read memoir in order to learn generally. So a good memoirist realizes that what they're doing is creative nonfiction, and that's two words. The creative is the style or the story you're telling, and the nonfiction is the information you are communicating. And you must understand that it isn't just your story and just your feelings and just your ideas that the reader cares about. The reader cares about what he or she is going to learn based upon your story. And that's something that new memoirists don't often understand or appreciate.
That's an excellent point. You know, in our program, we have a program called the NIA Authors Book, which walks authors through the process of writing their book step by step by step. But at the beginning, we always focus on their goals. What are their goals in writing this piece? And also, what is their takeaway message? I think that's exactly what you're mentioning, is that you have to have a purpose for this book. You have to have a message that is going to be implanted within the reader. But a lot of questions that people ask often is like, okay, I have 60 years of life. I have 70 years of life. How do I distill that down into a readable memoir? So what is your answer to those folks who are just beginning and don't really know how to pick out the most important, I guess, areas of their life?
That's really always quite challenging, and you have to. So there's what we call a frame to your essay or your book, and that frame is the narrative arc, the story that carries the reader from the beginning to the end. And then there's what is also called a focus, and that's what you're talking about. You're talking about what's the so you're reading my story, whether it's a book or an essay. The reader's reading the story, but the reader has to have a reason to read the story, and that's what you're talking about in the take-home message, or what we call the focus. But the part of the story you decide to tell has to do with your take-home message, and that's what you always have to remember, or the aspect of your life that you want to talk about. Nobody, I'm saying this without knowing the people who are listening, but nobody wants to read from start to finish everything you've ever done in your whole life.
Right.
So you have to decide what it is you want to focus on and what it is you want to give your readers in return. And that's really very important. So if you're talking about growing up and living in Harlem and changing your religious orientation, then you begin telling stories having everything to do with those two aspects of your life, and not telling stories about having things about things that do not have anything to do with that aspect of your life. So you're focusing in on one storyline, and that storyline points to what it is you want to say to your reader, the journey you're taking. We take many journeys in life. You need to pick a journey and follow that journey and make sure that what you're writing is in concert, in synchronization with the journey you're writing about.
Okay, so for you all who are writing memoirs, and if you have any questions around this topic, around this, how do you pick out your area? How do you pick out your focus in your book? Go ahead and type those questions into the chat box, and we'll come to those. I want to jump back one quick second, though, Lee, to these immersion creative nonfiction books, and I'm wondering about the access. You know, you're in a hospital. You're working with these scientists and things. How do you actually go about getting access to those areas?
Well, it's becoming more difficult as privacy is becoming more, in some ways, people are becoming more privacy oriented than ever before. But, and so, yeah, it's very difficult to get inside a hospital, or let's say a think tank, but it's not impossible. There are hundreds of thousands of books written every year, published every year, and people want to be talked about, and people want to communicate their triumphs, their ideas, and their challenges to the general public. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that if you want to go into a medical center or a university, that it will be easy, but it's not impossible. And you have to be, you have to know what you're talking about and go through a series of steps. But I'm not answering your question as easily as I would like, because every place you go is another difficult access challenge. But frankly, I've never been. Now I have a track record, and so when you have a track record, getting access is a lot easier than when you don't. But there are ways to go through. Like, let's just take a medical center for a minute. I have the way I started that first book about organ transplantation was I didn't walk into the operating room overnight. I decided that the best way I could get into this very difficult closed area was to go through the patients. Now, and so I first began introducing myself to the patients and their families and asked them to take me with them when they did their visits to their doctors and when they went to the clinic. And so even though I wasn't an approved observer at that time from the nurses or surgeons' point of view, a patient can pretty much take you anywhere you want to go. And so that's a way in, and you have to think about, if you can't get in the most direct way possible, then you figure out how you get in as an indirect way. For example, if you want to write about what's happening in a university, then maybe you enroll for a course and you become a student there. And when you become a student, you get an ID, and suddenly you have more access than lots of other folks. So, and you become more trusted. People become get used to seeing you and talking with you, and so it isn't impossible. It just takes a little time and dedication and effort. And let me just add this. And this is really important. So is the entire aspect of writing. So, I mean, I make my students write many drafts of what they're doing.
So you heard that, guys. You have many drafts, because they try to fight me on that, but you have many drafts. Okay.
Well, with all due respect, if they're fighting you, they're lazy. So, I'm sorry, but you know, Ernest Hemingway is a pretty famous writer, and at the time he was writing, there were no computers, which makes drafts easier. There were manual, not even electric typewriters, and he always bragged that he wrote the last draft of his famous novel, Farewell to Arms. The last chapter of Farewell to Arms 39 times. And it was 39 times he had to type it out 39 times, okay? And that's how you get good. And you don't get good right once in a great while. Let's say if you live to be 80, maybe 2 or 3 times in your life, you will be so brilliant and so inspired that you won't have to do a second draft. But most of the time, you end up doing 25, 30, 40 drafts of your piece. And every time you look at it, hopefully it gets better. It takes a lot of time to make it publishable and to make it mean something to a reader.
Now, okay, speaking about that piece of the consistency and working on your craft and continuing to push yourself forward, and you spoke about the hospital having been in that situation or in that realm for 4 years, so I'm wondering about 2 things. One is about determination and I guess keep pushing forward. A lot of people, when they come and they get to it, they have this bit of momentum in the beginning and then it sort of wanes down and then life hits them, right? So lots of things happen and the book kind of gets to be the second back burner. Everyone here mostly has another job, so they're not full-time writers. That's not what's supporting their bread and butter. That's not the main source of their income. So I'm wondering, like, for yourself, how have you managed to do that and keep consistent over the years? Push yourself.
Well, even now, even though I publish regularly, even now I need a couple of other jobs to make it work. If anyone out there of the 13 people listening thinks they're going to become rich and famous as a writer, just tell them to forget it. It's just not going to happen. Rarely does it happen. So writing has to be a mission, a call, something that you want to do no matter what the other difficulties and challenges are for your life. So here I am. It's my time. It is 10:33, but at 6 a.m. this morning, I was working on the work that I was writing. Okay, and I make it a priority that at least no matter how many jobs I have, I literally have 2 full-time jobs. And not only, and then I write, and I make it a priority to give my writing anywhere from an hour to 4 or 5 hours every day. Now, everybody can't do that, but almost everybody in the world, 5 days a week, could probably squeeze out an hour of their life to write. And it makes so much sense to write regularly on a regular schedule, even if you only have an hour or 2 every day, than to wait until 1 day in the weekend or 3 days at the end of the month to be able to write everything you want to write. Because every day you look at what you've written in a fresh manner, and you add to that. And I don't know any other successful writer who does not work on a somewhat regular schedule, whether it's 1 day, 1 hour a day, 4 hours a day, or 3 times a week. And just think about this. Think about the fact that if you would just spend an hour every day on your writing, 5 days, not 7 days a week, and you decided that you were going to produce a page, 1 page, that's all, for every day or hour you work, at the end of the year, you would have the equivalent of a book-length manuscript. So you work on a regular schedule. Every successful writer does, whether they're selling insurance during the day or driving a taxi or waiting on tables, and that's what you do. But like I say, there are writers who play with it, okay, who just play, and that's okay. Writing's fun, and you can play a little bit. And then there are writers with a mission. And the mission always is not only to tell your story, but to make an impact on the world, to make an impact on your readers. There is no reason in the world to write unless you're all alone and you need somebody to talk to, and you're going to talk to your keyboard. That's okay too. But why we write? To make an impact, to share what we know, what we've learned on our readers, and you do that by working hard and by sticking to it, and making it the best kind of work possible so that that impact will mean something to your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So writing is indeed, a spiritual practice, and we talk about it in our groups and in the webinars that I do. In that, like, these messages, these books, that these ideas that come to us are placed on our heart by God, like we would say, by God, by the Creator. So this message comes to us for a reason, and we are the one who is to give birth to that message. It didn't come for just to sit there like la la la, I'm just here. No, it came to be shared with other people. And so everyone here, and mostly everyone here that I see, that I know, some of these people here are all having messages that are very important, and some of them have held on to these messages for quite some time. So I'll say that some people here have been saying that they were going to write this book for 10 years, 15 years, some even longer than that. But I would say that the most people, everyone who's here, are dedicated to actually making a message. And I split this up. I really say this because there are a lot of self-publishing programs and folks who talk about publishing now only on the profit side. So they say, and this is true, you can use a book to build a platform for yourself. I teach people how to do that as well, but it's a little bit different. The intention is different when you're solely writing a book to make money so that you can build a platform for speaking or other sources of income. And the types of folks that we have here on this call with us today, who are hopefully going to make some income with their book and setting themselves up for the speaking engagements and all of those things, but also have that impactful message that they want to share. So I'm happy that you have reminded them that having that message is important, but also having the ability to kind of keep working their writing muscles, right? Keep pushing it forward and pushing it forward until they're able to get it done. So, all right. So let's jump into a couple of questions that we have. So let's see. Azhar says, this creative nonfiction genre seems fascinating. Wonderful. Do you recommend a book on writing in this genre? So the first book I will recommend, and then I'll come to Lee, but the first book I'll recommend is Lee's book, So You Can't Make This Stuff Up, which is really, I won't say the Bible of creative nonfiction, but it is, the go-to book for creative nonfiction. So that would be the first book, Azhar. And Lee, do you have any other suggestions of books that they should read?
Well, there's a shorter version of that book called Keep It Real. And they may look into that. And then there is a memoir-oriented book. Though the two first books, Keep It Real and You Can't Make This Stuff Up, focus on every aspect of creative nonfiction, including the legalities, the difficulties of, there are legal challenges and ethical challenges when you're writing true stories about real people using real names and things like that. So those first two books will deal with everything. And there's a third book about memoir writing that focuses completely on memoir writing, written by a guy named Dinty Moore, Moore.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about some of those legal ramifications? Eileen is asking, are there any legal ramifications with naming persons and institutions in your memoir? For instance, in her fiction title. So Eileen is someone who was writing her story, but originally she had written a fiction title based on her life, and now I think she's switching it over to be a memoir. So she's saying, and for instance, in my fiction, I changed the names to protect certain individuals. So can you talk to us a little bit about that legal side with naming folks?
Well, first of all, it's incorrect to assume that you're safe from litigation if you just change someone's name and someone's location. There have been cases in the court that if, even though names and places are changed, if you are not telling the truth, if you are slandering or libeling anyone, and it is quite possible that that those people, even though you've tried to change their names, could be recognized. And if those people in any way could be recognized and you have not told the truth, accurate truth about them, then you're as vulnerable for a lawsuit than you were if you didn't change their name. So just changing some stuff is not going to help you if you're not totally and completely accurate about what you're saying about them. And the challenge is, if you change too much then about them in order to disguise who they are, then you're not writing nonfiction at all. You're still writing fiction. So that's the challenge. But let me say that that what protects you is accuracy and truth. And so if you're showing something, telling a story, as long as the story you're telling is true and accurate, nobody can, well, anybody can sue anybody, but no one can win such a suit. That's what protects you, to be truthful and accurate about what it is you're saying, whether you use real names or not use real names. I try as hard as I possibly can to write true stories and to use real names and real places. The other thing about changing a lot is the fact that the more you change, the less credibility you have to a reader. If you begin changing names and changing places, why should the reader believe you? The reader, you build your credibility by the accuracy of the stories and you're telling and the people in it. So even if you change part of it, and you say part of this is changed to the reader, how does the reader know what has been changed and what hasn't, and whether you're believable or not? So
okay. So what about, okay, so I want to keep going on this question, and I see Anne, because we have a young lady, or I should say a lady who wrote her memoir, her life story. She wrote it under a pen name because it was dealing with a domestic abuse, and her husband, ex-husband, is still alive, and she comes from a very sheltered culture in which she did not want people to know that this was her in writing the book. So she did in fact change names and even her name, as well as location, names of location in there as well. So I'm wondering about the fact that there could be things that are true, but maybe that don't present someone who possibly is even still living in the best light. And what would you say to that type of work?
Well, with all due respect, I'll say a couple of things, but who cares if a person who doesn't deserve to be presented in the best light is not presented in the best light? Again, we're being truthful and accurate. If we're talking about someone who committed a crime, and we know that person committed a crime, and everybody else knows that person committed a crime, then why would you change their name to protect them? Why would you want to protect them? But but let me say just a couple of things about that. Also, the danger is not the person who has committed the crime, but the danger, the ethical and moral danger, is has to do with innocent victims. When you mention other people who are involved in the situation, who maybe aren't necessarily at fault for anything, then you have to think about that very, very carefully. The other thing is that you need to be honest with your readers. And if you are changing locations and changing names in certain situations, you got to tell your readers that. You can't fool them. That's the worst part. That the reader doesn't know when you've changed and why you've changed. But you and I were having this conversation, and I would say to you, "Look, this terrible thing happened, and I can't tell you exactly where it happened and who did it, but let me tell you what happened and why I can't tell you." Then you'll understand, and hopefully you'll trust me. But if you don't tell a reader what's going on, then, and it's not enough to say some of the names and places have been changed in this book, that doesn't really tell them anything. I think you really have to be very direct and be honest with your reader. That's what the reader wants from you in a memoir. Honesty and directness. Then there are certain things you can do without, and still be believable.
All right. All right. Well, that's perfect. Okay. So Anne is asking, do you feel that historical novels are also a part of this creative nonfiction genre?
Historical novels are novels. That's fiction. You can do what we call narrative history, which is based upon, and you can look up narrative history. It's becoming a very big deal thing to do at universities and with writers, using existing material, transcripts, other people's books, tons of library and historical data in order to recreate, based upon fact, total fact, whatever it is you're writing about. But the word novel means that you're writing fiction. But there is narrative history, and you have a great deal. You have a great deal of leeway as long as you can document all of the facts that you're presenting.
Okay. I think maybe some people get confused with the word story, because when they hear story, they automatically think of made up, but that's not what a story is. A story is in the presentation or the narrative function of how the material is being presented, and not in what is actually being said. Is that correct?
That is totally correct. Again, if I said to you, hey, let me tell you a story about what happened to me, you wouldn't believe that I'm making it up. You'd believe I'm telling you a story about what happened to me. And that's absolutely right, that there's true stories, and then there's embellished or made up or imaginary stories. And there's quite a difference. That's why we say all the time, it's true stories well told. And the word creative does not mean that you're making things up or you're exaggerating. It only means you're communicating information in a stylistic, narrative, true story-oriented way.
Okay. All right. So this is extremely important, you guys, especially those of you all who are in fields that are non-creative, if you want to say it that way, although all types of fields have creativity within them. But, you know, engineers and doctors and those types of fields, psychologists who have information that you want to share, but you don't want it to be dry and you don't want it to be boring. Basically, you want people to read your book. That's the whole purpose, right? So you're putting all of this effort into creating your book. And what we're saying is that creative nonfiction, using narrative and borrowing tips or borrowing techniques from the fiction genre, the novels, will be able to help you write your books in a way that is that people will actually like it. I guess that's the way we should say it. People will actually read it and they'll get what you're saying. So before we jump into the fellowship, Lee, is there any last bit of, I guess, a push or something you could share with those who are embarking upon writing their first books? Any tips or techniques you can share with them?
The building blocks of good creative nonfiction are scenes. And in my book, I explain what I call the yellow test. And if you write, let us say, a chapter or an article or an essay, and let us say it's 10 pages, I always suggest to my students that you print that when you think you're absolutely positively ready, that looks really good, you print out those pages and you take a yellow magic marker and you yellow in the scenes. And invariably, and you can do this with any really terrific piece of creative nonfiction that other people have published that you have admired for years. If you take their work and you take a yellow magic marker and you yellow in the scenes, there should be more or less anywhere from 40 to 60% of yellow glaring and blaring back at you. What
do you mean yellow in the scenes? Can you explain that a little bit for everyone?
Like I said, you print out your story, your creative nonfiction story, and you take a yellow magic marker and you look for scenes. That is, scenes are little stories, as you know, just like in a movie, cinematically. And you take that yellow magic marker and you yellow in the scenes. And most creative nonfiction, the best creative nonfiction, is well balanced between around half yellow and not yellow. Not yellow means information, or it means telling. Yellow means scenes that show, with dialogue and description and action, scenes in which something happens. And if you do not have an ample portion of scenes, it's the scene that drives the reader forward, and it's the scene that makes the reader interested and allows you to teach them something. It is the show. I know you tell your students this, that creative nonfiction is a challenge of showing and not telling. Mm-hmm. And so the scenes will prove that you're showing people. And if you don't have a lot of yellow, if you don't have a lot of scenes, then you know it's a red flag that you've made a mistake, or you might have made a mistake, and you should go back and figure out how you can make your work more cinematic. The reader responds to showing and not telling.
All right, so that's a big takeaway, everyone. And I hope that you all understand that. If you don't understand what he means about yellowing in the scenes and what scenes exactly are, then we could talk about that later. But this is a big point, that you need to include dialogue. You need to include the relationships between the people who are in your story, what's happening between them, and not just have this, not just have it where you're telling them everything, because people will check out and then they will not get to the next page, and your goal is to get them to the next page. All right, so Umar Fraz is asking, what is a fiction story made up with facts known as? So I think she's just saying like a novel based on true, maybe a novel based on a true story or something. Can you speak to that just briefly?
Well, a novel is a novel. A fiction story is a fiction story. But there are these movies, for example, called Bots, B-O-T-S, and that's those based on true stories. But they're based on true stories. They're not true stories. So we don't know, again, what to believe or not to believe. They're bots based on true stories is fiction.
Right. So they're all mixed up. We don't, like you said, we don't know. Okay. So we have just a little bit of time, and I see you all's questions. So Ann and Azhar, I'm going to come back to those last questions, but I want to jump over to this fellowship that Lee shared the link with us, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box for all of you all. So those of you all who have not seen the fellowship, I just put the link into the chat box so you can check that out as well. But this is called the Think, Write, Publish Science and Religion Fellowship. It is to create a group of, I guess, a community of storytellers, it says. So I'll just read it from the website. So we are building a new community of storytellers who will write, publish, and disseminate engaging and inspiring nonfiction narratives of harmonies, reconciliation, and even productive interaction between science and religion. So I know a lot of people had questions about this, Lee. So I wondered if you could talk about Think, Write, Publish and this fellowship in general.
Yeah, the fellowship is sponsored by the Templeton Foundation, and one of my jobs is I work for Arizona State University, and my other job is I work for Creative Nonfiction Magazine. Those are two of the sponsors of the fellowship, and basically it is so incredibly wide open for new ideas that it'd be hard for me to give you direct guidance. What we want is for people to apply who have some interesting new ideas about the way in which science and religion either come together or don't go together. It doesn't have to be harmonies. It could be the lack of harmonies between science and religion. And the application process is pretty easy. We're asking for a page about who you are, and the page maybe a little more about what you would write about in relation to the connection or lack thereof between science and religion, no matter what religion you're talking about, and you know what your ideas are. And then if you are chosen for this fellowship, you will receive one, $10,000, and two, you'll be given 3 in-depth 4 or 5 day workshops over the course of about a year to teach you everything you need to know and beyond about creative nonfiction, meeting editors, meeting publishers, and you will receive an experienced mentor to work with you on a regular basis to write this essay that you're proposing. So that's one aspect of the fellowship. There are other aspects, and if you look on the website, you will see. But basically, the prime thing is this fellowship prize. It'll be really terrific. The last Think Write Publish program we did has led to, we had 12 people again, and one got a job writing for Slate.com, and 2 have published books. One recently reviewed in the New York Times.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Now, did you found Think Write Publish?
I made it up.
Other thing that was funny too, because you said I work for, one of my jobs is working at the magazine, the Creative Nonfiction magazine. And I'm thinking like you founded that, so you're an entrepreneur too. Yeah.
Yes, I started Creative Nonfiction magazine, like I said, almost 25 years ago. And I suggest another thing is I'm hoping that the people listening might think about subscribing to the magazine, because or submitting to the magazine. Both, we publish really terrific essays, and there's always 3 or 4 craft columns that will help you along. The website to that is creativenonfiction.org. And so, and also for those of you really interested, over Memorial Day weekend in Pittsburgh, there's a creative nonfiction conference for 3 days, and there will be literary agents and publishers and craft lectures and panels, all focusing on the idea of learning and publishing and distributing your work.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know about that. So I'll look that up. And I just typed into the chat box for you all, creativenonfiction.org, so you can check that. And the fellowship link is in there as well. And I think you all have Lee's website that I sent earlier, but I will put that in as well. Terrific. So let's see what last questions we have. Lee, is it okay to keep you for another 10 minutes or so?
Can I just do 5? I actually have another meeting coming up, but I can do 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. So let's see. I'm going to go through these and see which one is the most. All right. So, well, Eileen says she really appreciated the information on the scenes. So that was great. Great, Eileen.
Or that's the most important thing to remember.
All right, so that's your big takeaway for today, you guys. All right, so Azhar says, how do you effectively take notes while physically engaged in an immersive experience to allow for accuracy later when you write? So we'll end it on that last question.
I don't effectively take notes. I rely on my memory very often. So instead of effectively taking notes about what everybody says to the syllable, I usually just jot down something like, remember the conversation that happened in the operating room this morning. And then as soon as I get alone, I will sit down with my computer or sit down with my notebook and write out everything that I remember from that conversation or that experience. But you do not necessarily have to quote every single thing that was said. You can, in fact, recall a conversation as accurately as you can, and the sooner you do that in the privacy of wherever you go, the better. But remember, when we tell each other stories, we're telling one another, sitting in a bar or a restaurant or in a library, wherever, we're just telling them what we remember. And the reader knows that you're telling them what you remember and that you don't have a tape recorder and a video camera strapped to your forehead.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much, Lee, for taking the time out to share with us today. Everyone who is listening, I hope that you all apply for the fellowship, get interested in that, get subscribed to Creative Nonfiction Magazine. You have the link for that. You can also submit to the magazine and follow Lee. He's on Twitter. He has a website, so follow the things that he's doing as well and support him in the items that he is pushing out as well. So I'm going to let you go and just really say thank you so much for taking the time. This was wonderful. I think we all learned quite a lot, and this is really going to help us push forward in our work. So thank you so much, Lee.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to all of your students.
You're welcome. All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Okay, so everyone that's still here, I'm going to see if there are any other questions here that we can answer that I have, but I will also tell you all we have a lot of things coming up with NIA Press coming down the pike. So our next group of NIA Authors Group is going to be starting. So those of you all who want support and you are serious, this is not for people who are just kind of thinking about writing a book. This is for those of you all who are serious and you want support in writing your books. You want to email us at info@niapress.com. and let me know, and we will get back with you and see if you're a good fit for our program. We recognize now that not everyone is a good fit for the program, but there are some of you all who are serious about getting your books done, and you want the support, and you have a dynamic message. That is extremely important. So you have a message that you want to share that is going to enhance the world, and we can help you get that done. All right, so email us at info@niapress.com, and we can talk to you about the next NIA Authors Group that's coming up. All right, so yes, all of the information, like the word count, all that stuff is on the website link for the fellowship. So I'm going to put that back into the chat box again, but just so that you have it. So that's there. Khadija says, thank you, Lee. So I'll make sure he gets that. She learned a lot and will be subscribing to the magazine and buying his book. Very grateful. Wonderful. All right. Cheryl says, thank you. Lots of great info. Wonderful. Azhar says, thank you both for sharing. Great. Camila, I have not put my stream of ideas on paper, just gathering information. All right. Wonderful, Camila. That's where every book starts, is in the research and the idea phase. So everyone starts there and then you go forward. So Anne is saying, what things can she do to make her book flow better and still keep it true to the historical references? So Anne, for you, if you're serious and you're moving forward and you want additional information, I think you can maybe just email Lee as well. And if you want full support, then we can talk about joining the NIA Authors Group later. So Eileen says, very helpful information. Okay, Jennifer, if we made up dialogue within these scenes, would that still be considered creative nonfiction without being a novel? So if you make it up and it's not based on actually what you're remembering and it's not true at all, then that is fiction. So remember, not creative nonfiction is, just as Lee said, you can't make this stuff up. That's the name of his book. So remember that in nonfiction, creative nonfiction, you can't make this stuff up. So it's all truth. If it starts to be made up stuff, then that's a fiction title. All right, Anne says, the problem I am encountering is that it seems more like a string of short stories and it doesn't read like a fluid stories because I am finding it difficult to transition because of a lack of information. All right, every single piece, every book has an arc, right? So you start, you drop the reader right into some type of action, and then you show a progression with the characters, and then you leave them someplace where the message that you want to be implanted is there, right? So every book has a story arc. So if you're finding it difficult, it may be that you don't know what your arc is. You know, you're not sure where you're going or what you want, what the journey is. So I would maybe take a step back for yourself and think about, what is the journey of my story? You know, what is the transition from one place to the next place? The information, I'm not sure what you mean by that yet, the lack of information that you want to include. But if you do need to do any additional research or any of that type of fact gathering, then you can always do that and add that. Okay. All right, so let's see. I think those are all of most of the questions I see. Umar Fry says, does a true story mean a couple of incidents, or should it include a memoir type? Not quite sure what you mean by that. Does a true story mean a couple of incidents, or should it include a memoir type? So a true story is just a true story, right? So that's what that is. It can be of any length. So it may be a short true story, or it could be, you know, a longer true story. It depends on your goal, and it depends on what you're trying to say. All right. So wonderful. I just see some people are motivated. Louise got me motivated. Wonderful. Camellia, thank you for the opportunity. This has been great. Wonderful. I'm glad you all got something out of this. Anne says, Jazakallahu khairan for the advice and helpful tips. All right, wonderful. All right, guys. So that is it for this masterclass. We have some additional masterclasses that are going to be happening. I'm going to try to do these like once a month to expose you all to other folks who are in the literary world, so that you can really see many of the areas or some of the trajectory that you can go. There are so many areas that you can go into. So once you know all of those, you can see how it fits with what you're trying to do, and you can put it all together for yourself. So again, go to email us at info@niapress.com for information on the NIA Authors Group, which is going to be starting up again pretty soon. I will send you all information on that on your email as well. But as we sign off, we ask God to protect us. We ask God to make sure that our hearts are pure, and to make our intentions pure, so that we can get our message out into the world, so that we can have a positive evolution of society, right? You know, we know that we want to positively evolve, and us sharing what we know, what has been given to us, the blessings that have been given to us, is a part of that. So signing off, everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the NIA Authors Group. All right. Assalamu alaikum.